It's roughly 5,000 years ago. You're a man. You wake up just before dawn, and the fire your group kept burning through the night has gone down to a lazy orange glow. Someone needs to feed it. That someone is probably you. You crawl out from under a pile of animal skins, step over 3 people, sleeping on the ground, and for a half second, still foggy, still half dreaming, you look around at the small cluster of humans who share your life, your group, your people, and somewhere in that cluster, there is a woman, maybe more than one. The question of how many is it turns out one of the most loaded questions in all of human evolutionary history. It sounds like it should have a clean answer, like someone should have figured this out by now. And in a way they have. The answer exists. It's just buried under about 6 different scientific fields, 2 million years of competing evolutionary pressures, and a surprisingly large number of academic papers that all disagree with each other in fascinating ways. The short answer is probably 1, mostly, usually, with enormous, messy, culturally shaped exceptions. The long answer is what this video is about. And I promise you the real story of human mating structure is stranger, more politically inconvenient, and a little more embarrassing for everyone involved than any simple answer could ever be. Let's start with why this question is so hard to answer, because it's not just hard for us sitting here in the present. It was hard for the researchers who spent careers on it. It was hard for the anthropologists who visited every surviving hunter-gatherer society on the planet. It's hard because the answer keeps changing depending on which angle you're looking, from biology, archaeology, genetics, or the actual behavior of real human societies throughout recorded history. Here's what we know. Of the roughly 1,200 human societies that have ever been formally cataloged by anthropologists, every culture, every tribe, every civilization, we have solid data on about 85% of them have permitted polygyny. That's the technical term for one man having multiple wives simultaneously, 85%. But here's the thing. Permitting something and practicing it at scale are very different things. In most of those polygynous societies, only a small fraction of men, typically somewhere between 5% and 25%, depending on the society, actually had more than one wife at any given time. The rest, one partner, or none. Let that sit with you for a second. The default assumption that ancient men were roaming around collecting wives like trading cards is not what the data shows. What the data shows is something much more complicated, much more human, and honestly, much more interesting. So let's go to the deepest source we have, the genes. In 2015, a landmark genetic study published in Nature, Genetics looked at patterns in human Y-chromosome diversity. That's the chromosome passed from father to son, generation after generation. What they found was startling. Around 5000 to 7000 years ago, there was a dramatic collapse in male genetic diversity. Not female diversity, just male. For every 17 women who successfully reproduced and passed their genes forward during that period, only one man did the same. One man, 17 women. That is not evidence of peaceful monogamy. That is not even evidence of mild polygyny. That is evidence of something that looks from a genetic standpoint almost feudal. A small number of reproductively dominant males controlling access to an enormous number of females, while the vast majority of men left almost no genetic trace at all. Now, before you take that number and run with it, because that number is genuinely shocking, there's important context. This bottleneck appears to coincide with the rise of patrilineal clan systems, meaning this wasn't necessarily about one man literally having 17 wives. It's about entire patrilineal lineages, groups of related men either thriving or being wiped out together. But still, the asymmetry is real, and it goes back further than 5000 years. Here's where it gets fascinating. Evolutionary biologists have a trick for figuring out a species' mating system, even without any historical records. You look at the body, because millions of years of selection pressure leave physical evidence, and the evidence is written directly into the anatomy. The key measurement is called the sexual dimorphism ratio. That's the size difference between males and females. In highly polygynous species, gorillas, elephant seals, baboons, males are dramatically larger than females, sometimes twice the size. The logic is brutal and simple. When males compete physically for access to multiple females, bigger males win more often, and their size genes get passed down. Over generations, the males in that species become giants relative to the females. In monogamous species, most birds, many small primates, males and females, are almost identical in size. No physical competition means no selection pressure for bulk. Where do humans land? Human males are, on average, about 15% larger than human females. Heavier, taller, with denser bone structure, 15%. That number puts us squarely in the middle. Not gorillas, not gibbons. Somewhere in between, in a zone that evolutionary biologists call mildly polygynous. Our bodies are whispering that our ancestors weren't fully monogamous, but they weren't running harems either. The honest read of human anatomy is occasional polygyny within a system that leaned toward pair bonding. They weren't built for one extreme. Neither are you. Now, if the body size evidence feels indirect, there's a more intimate data point that researchers have spent a genuinely uncomfortable amount of time studying. Sperm competition. In species where females routinely mate with multiple males, males evolve to produce larger quantities of sperm with greater motility, specifically designed to compete against rival sperm already present. The testes grow larger relative to body size. The sperm themselves become better fighters. This is evolution turning reproduction into an arms race, happening entirely at the microscopic level. Gorillas, who live in harems, where one dominant male has exclusive access to females, have tiny testes relative to their body size. No competition, no need for volume. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, who live in highly promiscuous groups, where females mate with multiple males, have enormous testes relative to body size. Full-scale sperm, war all the time. Humans, somewhere in the middle. Again, we are not a fully promiscuous species. We are not a fully monogamous species. We are frustratingly and fascinatingly in between. But all of this is biology. What about actual behavior? What were real ancient humans actually doing? This is where anthropology earns its paycheck. The best living window we have into pre-agricultural human behavior comes from studying modern hunter-gatherer societies. Groups like the Kungsan of southern Africa, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Agta of the Philippines, and dozens of others who maintained foraging lifestyles into the 20th century. These groups aren't identical to our Paleolithic ancestors, and researchers are careful about that, but they're the closest living comparison we have. And what those societies look like overwhelmingly is this: a baseline of pair bonding, usually one primary partner with polygyny, practiced by a minority of high-status males, and a significant amount of what researchers diplomatically call extra-pair mating, affairs in plain language, on both sides. Among the Hadza, for instance, a study by anthropologist Frank Marlowe found that about 4% of men had more than one wife at any given time. 4%. The rest were functionally monogamous, even in a society that permitted multiple wives. Similar patterns show up across hunter-gatherer groups worldwide. Polygyny is allowed, polygyny is practiced, but it's not the statistical norm. It's the exception concentrated at the top of the social hierarchy. There's a reason for that. Which brings us to the part nobody talks about enough. Here's what gets left out of most conversations about ancient polygyny: it was expensive. Brutally, practically unsustainably expensive. In a foraging society, a man with 2 wives has 2 women he is expected to provide for, and 2 sets of children. Without agriculture, without stored food, without the economic infrastructure that makes resource accumulation possible, supporting multiple families simultaneously was a logistical challenge that most men simply could not meet. You needed to be exceptionally skilled at hunting. You needed exceptional social status. You needed alliances with other men who would support you. A 2012 study, published in Behavioral Ecology, analyzed data from 230 traditional societies and found a consistent pattern: polygyny rates correlated directly with resource inequality. The more unequal the distribution of resources in a society, the more polygyny you got. In highly egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands, the kind that existed for most of human prehistory, polygyny was rare, precisely because extreme resource inequality was rare. Nobody had enough excess to afford it. Think about that. The structure of ancient mating wasn't just about desire or biology. It was about economics. about who could actually afford to feed more than one family. And for most of human history, for the vast, overwhelming majority of the time our species has existed, most men could not. Then roughly 1,000 to 1,2000 years ago, something happened that rewired the entire system. Agriculture. The shift from foraging to farming didn't just change what humans ate. It changed who owned what. For the first time in human history, land became a thing you could possess. Grain became a thing you could stockpile. Cattle became a thing you could count and accumulate. Wealth, real, storable, heritable wealth, became possible in a way it had never been before. And with wealth came radical inequality. And with radical inequality came something the evolutionary logic had always permitted, but resource constraints had largely prevented polygyny at scale. The powerful men of early agricultural civilizations, kings, chiefs, warlords, high priests, accumulated wives and concubines in numbers that would have been physically impossible for any hunter-gatherer. King Solomon, according to the Hebrew Bible, had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Genghis Khan, according to genetic estimates, has approximately 16 million male descendants alive today. 16th century Chinese Emperor Jiajing reportedly maintained a harem of thousands. These are the extreme examples, but they reveal the direction the system tilted when the economic constraints came off. That Y-chromosome bottleneck from 500 to 7000 years ago. It falls right in the middle of this transition. Right when agricultural civilizations were consolidating power, building hierarchies, and allowing a small number of men to monopolize reproductive access on a scale evolution had never seen before. The genes remember what happened, even if we've largely forgotten. But here's the part that I think is genuinely underappreciated in this whole conversation. Across all of this, the polygyny, the sperm competition evidence, the genetic bottlenecks, the harem-building emperors, there is a persistent, stubborn, evolutionarily ancient signal running underneath all of it. Human beings form pair bonds. Not all species do. Gorillas don't really pair bond. The dominant male has his harem, and that's a transaction, not a partnership. Chimpanzees don't pair bond at all. But humans across virtually every culture ever studied have some version of a bonded pair as the basic social unit. A couple, a partnership, a dyad. Anthropologist Helen Fisher, who has spent decades studying human love and attachment, argues that pair bonding in humans is not a recent cultural invention. It's a biological drive as old as our species. The neurochemistry of romantic attachment, the dopamine spikes, the oxytocin bonding, the serotonin fluctuations. These are not features of a species designed for pure polygyny or pure promiscuity. These are features of a species designed at some deep level to attach to a specific individual, which creates the central tension of the whole story. Because humans are also clearly capable of polygyny, and clearly capable of infidelity, and clearly shaped by status-based mating competition. We are built simultaneously for pair bonding and for the instincts that undermine it. That is not a contradiction. That is the design. Let that sit with you for a moment. You are the descendant of a line of humans who navigated all of this. Every ancestor you have going back through the agricultural revolution, through the hunter-gatherer bands, through the savannah, managed to reproduce successfully inside a system that was never clean, never simple, and never perfectly consistent. They pair bonded and they competed. They formed attachments and they violated them. They built social structures to manage the tension, and then they broke those structures when it was advantageous. And here's the thing, that messy, contradictory biology meets culture system. It was successful, wildly successful. 8 billion humans on the planet is not the output of a broken mating system. It is the output of an extraordinarily adaptable one. The reason the answer to "how many wives did ancient men have" is so unsatisfying is that the real answer is it depended. It depended on what era, what society, what resource environment, what status the individual male occupied. The average ancient man probably had one primary partner for most of his life, because economics, social policing, and the logistics of survival made anything else impractical. But the system always had a polygynous tier at the top, and the system always had pair bonding at its emotional core. We are not gorillas. We are not gibbons. We are not chimpanzees. We are the species that evolved to do all three things badly simultaneously and somehow make it work. Here's the part that should make you look up from your phone for a second. The mating system you live inside right now, legal monogamy, enforced by culture and law in most of the world, is historically unusual. It became the dominant legal standard in Europe, largely through the influence of the medieval Catholic Church, which banned polygyny not purely for theological reasons, but for deeply political ones. Powerful men with many wives produced many sons. Many sons meant fragmented inheritances, feuding heirs, and political instability. The Church's marriage rules one man, one woman, primogeniture, were, among other things, a power consolidation strategy. The monogamy most of us consider natural was, at least in part, an institutional invention. That doesn't make it wrong. Cross-cultural research consistently shows that enforced monogamy correlates with lower rates of male-on-male violence, lower rates of crime, and better outcomes for children because it distributes reproductive access more equally among men, reducing the desperate competition that extreme inequality creates. But natural it is not, or at least no more natural than the polygynous alternatives that most human societies have also practiced. It is one solution, and arguably a good one, to an evolutionary problem that was never going to have a clean answer. So, concretely, what is the number? Based on the convergent evidence, anthropological surveys, genetic data, body morphology, cross-cultural studies, the best current estimate from researchers like David Geary, Robin Dunbar, and Helen Fisher looks something like this. For most of human prehistory, in most hunter-gatherer contexts, somewhere between 75% and 85% of men were functionally monogamous, meaning one primary partner at a time, even in societies that permitted more. The polygynous minority, the 15% to 25% who maintained multiple, simultaneous partnerships, were almost universally high-status males with exceptional resource access. The average ancient man, if we're being statistically honest, had approximately one wife, not because he was morally enlightened, not because he didn't want more, but because more was simply not within reach, economically, socially, or practically. The kings and chiefs and warlords, with their dozens of wives, were not the average. They were the extreme outliers skewing the distribution. The data on them is vivid and memorable. The data on the ordinary man, the one with one partner, a small fire, and 3 kids sleeping on a dirt floor, is quiet and invisible, the way ordinary life always is. They were the majority. They always were. There's something almost vertiginous about looking at this whole picture from the outside. You carry in your body right now the physical evidence of millions of years of mating decisions. Your height relative to a woman's, the particular architecture of your neurochemistry when you fall in love, the specific anxieties that show up in relationships. All of it is information. All of it is the residue of a system that was never perfectly designed, because evolution doesn't design for happiness, it designs for reproduction, and those are not the same goal. The ancient man by the fire, the one we started with crawling out from under the animal skins, probably loved someone, probably felt jealousy, probably felt attachment and desire, and the specific terror of watching someone you care about get sick with no way to help. He was not so different from you. The architecture was the same. The fire was smaller. And whatever his mating situation was, one partner, 2, or none, what we know for certain is that it worked. He made it. He passed his genes forward through an unbroken chain that stretches from that cold savannah morning all the way to you sitting here, watching a stick figure explain evolutionary biology. That chain is about 7500 generations long, every single link held. Let that sit with you. So here's my question for you, and leave it in the comments, because I genuinely want to know if you could go back and live 1 week inside a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer band just to see what it was actually like. The social dynamics, the relationships, the whole structure of it. Would you do it? And what do you think would surprise you the most? I'll see you in the next one.